Hello, and welcome to Confessions of a Terrible Leader, where real leaders share the raw truth about the lessons they learned the hard way, so you don't have to. Join our host, Lacey Nelson, founder of Transcend Leadership Collective and former terrible leader. Every leader can become worthy of being followed if they are willing to put in the work. On this podcast, we share the messy stories and behind-the-scenes reality of what the work actually entails. We welcome you to this community of revolutionary leaders who believe honest communication, healthy conflict, and building cultures of acceptance, respect, and trust are not only possible, but non-negotiable for cultivating world-class teams. Hello, listeners, and welcome back to Confessions of a Terrible Leader. I am your host and former terrible leader, Lacey Nelson. Today, we have the Business Chaos Sorter. What a fantastic title. Joining us, Amanda Bedell. Welcome to the show. And thank you for making time for us today.
Thank you so much for having me.
So, to give our listeners a little bit of context, you own a consultancy, correct?
Mm-hmm.
And you are clearly helping people get their business sorted. And we're going to dive into that a little bit more. But before we jump into how you do that, I'd love to have more of your story as to how did you arrive here? Because I know you didn't start here, and I don't want to steal any of your thunder because you have an incredible story. Would you give us the SparkNote versions of how you arrived where you're at today?
Yes. So, I'm known as the Business Chaos Sorter, but before I was a Business Chaos Sorter, I was inundated with chaos myself, up to my eyeballs with chaos, because I ran a bakery business in Seattle, Washington. I started that bakery business as one farmer's market and bootstrapped it to a brick and mortar with a wholesale manufacturing facility where we did 2.2 million annually in sales. I worked all the time and for the longest time, I didn't even have a GM. So that is a little bit of a teaser into what my confession will be later in the episode. So stay tuned for that. But when I think back to I wrote a Facebook page message it was like a headline or a header on my Facebook page in August of 2018. And what I wrote on that post was in a quote, it says, "In the review mirror of life, I will be able to look back on these times and see that these experiences help me receive my heart's desire in grace and in perfect ways." That's Amanda speak for shit's hitting the fan. Because 4 months after I wrote that post, my life changed forever through a series of decisions that I made over the course of 6 years. I had to sell my bakery business. I was out of money. To me, this was a huge public failure. So here I had all of this revenue in. I was actually 4 credit cards in debt, had an empty 401k, and was literally out of personal capital to continue to go. So the reason why I share that with people now is that I get to look in the review mirror, have a review mirror moment, and say to my reflection, you made it to the other side, that you got there.
Wow.
Yeah.
I can only imagine the amount of learning that has taken place and that you had first of all, having that just on display publicly, where were you at mentally, emotionally during that time of having to shut it down? Did you have one moment when you just knew, I'm done? Or was it a slow build over time? How did you arrive to that?
Yeah, I'm actually 1 out of 10 business owners that successfully exit their businesses. So even though it was not successful to me, when you think about and you pour everything into your business like I did, you are setting up your business to either have a successful sale where you get to live on a yacht. I don't know. You're thinking like, oh, I'll be able to sell my business for millions of dollars, or that you've got this time freedom. And I had neither of those. I was working 24 hours a day, 7 days a week if I could, but I did have to sleep. So it wasn't 24 hours, it was more like 18 to 20. So I would sleep 4 to 6 hours a night.
Gosh. Oh.
I didn't have a general manager. I was inundated with staff problems and low profits. And so the biggest thing for me was I saw that I was going down a drain. I just wasn't sure how fast the water was running. So I started to get really meticulous about my cash flow. Every payroll was scary for me. I was just so razor thin on everything. That was the piece that I was missing and why I do what I do now. So everything that I do, I'm looking at the business holistically, but it always goes back to the numbers. So when you're looking at your profit and loss statement or your balance sheet, all of those are decisions that you made in your company. They're decisions that you made each and every day to make those numbers happen. And what I help people do is if you don't like those numbers, let's change them. And what are the strategies that are attached to each number so that we can make a difference in your life? So if you need more revenue, then what is that? Do you need a higher profit margin? What are the things that we can do to do that? So I fill in the gap of what I was missing back in my business and look at all of the ways that we can get the end result that we want, but that we can do that just by small tweaks in different areas in a business. It doesn't have to be big, a brand new marketing campaign.
Right.
It's what do you do now that works and how can we turn up the volume just a little bit so that it makes a difference? That's just one thing, but let's look at pricing or your costs and all of the pieces of the puzzle.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I had some time to look on your website and I loved seeing that you're really speaking to, hey, women that are in male dominated industries. I'm especially talking to you. What makes your approach different, or maybe speaking to why pick that niche? Why is it that specific male dominated industry that you wanted to connect with the manufacturing, with the whole list? I also work in a predominantly male dominated industry. We do a lot of work with manufacturing and agriculture. And I loved seeing that. And I want to hear your perspective. What is it about that space that those of us that are women navigating that space, what tools do we need? Are we missing that you're like, hey, this is why I'm talking to you?
Well, my heart really goes to the trades a little bit more. Manufacturing, I absolutely love my manufacturing companies that I work with, but the trades and construction, a lot of times it's a low barrier entry to business. So you can start a landscaping business or a painter business with $100, $500.
Right.
You can borrow the tools that you need in order to make that business happen at the very beginning. It's also a lot of breadwinners, people that really need to support their families are in that type of business. So the reasons why I tend to go towards the trades is that they are owner operators like I was in the bakery business. I am not interested in going back into food. Food is really difficult. And to be honest, it's a big lift and the whole industry needs to change in a way that makes it work. How that's going to happen, I mean, that would be life's work. And I'm just not quite as passionate about that as I am, let's make the livelihoods of these families who may be immigrants or women who need to make a really good living in doing trade. We also need trades in our world. And even with an economic boom and AI and robots and all of that, we still need our landscapers and our painters and folks to help us with our houses and things like that.
Absolutely.
Yeah. And that's a better way to make a livable wage, something that you can flourish on when you're doing it right.
Yes.
So I take the lessons of, my pricing structure was off and a few things that I got from my bakery experience and all of the leadership and team building that I got from that. And I turn it over to folks that have lower barriers to entry when it comes to business.
I love that. I love that. Yeah, it makes me think of the classic. I'm sure you've read it many times over, the E-Myth of the technician that is so good at their skill, at their trade, and then they launch a business and it's a completely different skill set to run the business, to understand the finances, to build teams, to lead those teams well. It is not the reason people got into it. Usually it's because, hey, I'm good at landscaping. I have more work than I can handle. I maybe want to bring on some more people. or like yourself, your farmer's market experience exploded and you're like, wow, there's so much demand here. But taking that next step is a completely new territory and isn't something that most of us, I would argue, any of us actually just intrinsically know how to do. We have to seek it out. So I'm hearing you say, like, you're holding people accountable to themselves and holding their hand and helping them to figure out, how do you take this to the next level, make it successful, and not lose yourself and get buried in bad debt and exhaustion and 4 hours of sleep being your norm, which, whew, yes. So what a gift you are to so many. I'm inspired by how you took your experience, instead of walking away from it having a shame response. You're like, no, 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 no. I'm going to tell you, like, here's where the wheels fell off. And I don't want that for you. And I know there's a better way now. So let me help you now to get there.
Yeah. And let me just take out a myth of like, I jumped right from one thing to the other. I'm now on year 4 of healing. So it really was a healing journey. And as I was saying, I was lucky enough to exit and have a buyer.
Yeah.
And I did get out of my company with my debt paid,
Yay.
but barely enough to survive. Really, I would think of the word failure and I would burst into tears. The bakery was my life. The people that I worked with were my people. Like, I was cultivating them and, just going towards that leadership conversation. What I was doing at the time, Seattle, Washington had a $15 minimum wage that was passed in 2016. That's great. My people, I paid them more than that anyway. I paid them $17 an hour. However, when the bill passed, even though small business owners had the opportunity to have a runway that was multiple years long, our employment pool dried up. So even at $17 an hour, which was higher than the minimum wage for large businesses when this passed, my Craigslist ads and where I posted ads went from, yes, I was getting them before, and no, I was not after. So I had no new folks coming in. The restaurant industry is higher turnover. And I'll tell you in a minute how I stretched the turnover so that it was longer than industry standard. But, I get a lot of young folks, and we were, a typical restaurant. So I looked at underutilized sources for employment. I knew a colleague at Goodwill. I was the PR director of Goodwill back in the day. And one of my colleagues had moved to the prison systems. And I talked to her about getting some folks that were in reentry. So I worked on first chance and second chance opportunities for folks. So those that were exiting the correctional facilities could work at my store, and that gives them a solid ground.
Yeah.
Again, do I want them to work with me forever? No, I don't. I want them to be there, get stable, and then move through. The same was that we created an apprenticeship program for youth that lived on the street. And that youth shelter was it was downtown. So they had to get up to where I was, which was a couple miles away. And we would just teach them how to work.
Yeah.
Again, stabilization. I watched people go from living in cars and under bridges to their first apartments, which was a huge game changer for me and where the passion was.
Yes.
I had so much passion around this. The food too, because I'm celiac, it was all gluten-free. So I was not lacking in the passion department for this business. So when we talk about how I move towards, the passion that I have now, which is telling people how to actually make money doing their business so that they aren't in survival mode always, as I was.
Yeah.
It was not an easy road to get here. It's 4 years later. And at first, I wouldn't be able to talk like this. In some of the first interviews that I've done, I even did get teary-eyed and people could hear the emotion. So it's not a fast switch over. But more of a gradual healing. There's a lot that went on there, and, owning up to the decisions I made too,
right,
that got me there. But yeah, that's how the business chaos order was born.
Oh my gosh, what a beautiful and honest and raw story. I see the consistency though in you're still doing the same thing that is your heart's passion. It's just the vehicle with which you're doing it through is different, right? But that common thread of living out your passion to help others, to give people that opportunity to get stable, to get a second chance if they need it, to get a good start at their first chance. And that is continued in your life. That is such the common thread. And that is something when we're working with our clients and we're asking them to identify their core values and their understanding of their sense of personal purpose or personal, what is that thing that drives you? And we often encourage them, look all the way back, go back even to childhood, and you're going to see some threads that carry all the way through. And this is just such a beautiful example of that thread. Like from the outside, it looks like you're doing something radically different. But if you look at the thread, that common thread of the impact you wanted to make, that's consistent and that's still there. What a beautiful, beautiful thing. Now that we have this backstory and we understand some of the hardships and the wins and the tough decisions that had to be made, I'm sure you have a juicy confession for us. So if you would be so kind as to launch in to your confession and let us know what is one of those big mistakes that you are willing to talk about in your journey of understanding what it means to lead.
Well, I was a really young leader. So even back when I was 16 years old and worked at the Dairy Queen in town, I was promoted into a leadership role. And throughout my career, I continued to do these leadership roles. I was thrown into managing at a really young age at a PR agency when I was 23, 24 years old. So I have so many stories, but just to stay within the bakery realm, because I laugh at that one quite often. So I didn't have a GM for the longest time. And there was this point in my bakery career that I had left for a vacation for 4 days to see my sister in Philadelphia. And I could account for $24,000 that was missed in orders based on my absence at the bakery.
Ouch.
And so that was a huge ding, ding, ding moment. Like, you are attached to this business. You have your hands in way too many things. You're doing too much. It cannot survive without you. I already knew it was going to be kind of rocky without me anyway. But, I did see I was going down the drain personally. I wasn't sure how to fix this. I knew I had like a year and a half, maybe 2 years left of financing, and I wasn't sure really what to do. So I did hire my first GM. And just a little side note for those of you that own businesses, notice that I found money to hire a GM, but for some reason I still didn't pay myself. So that's, a whole nother thing to talk about. But with this general manager, she was awesome. I learned so much from having her because it is so different to go from being in a corporate setting or even nonprofit where I came from, agency land, whatever, running and leading people, to actually having a team run your business, your baby that you born from one farmer's market. So I didn't realize this, but I was very particular about how things got done. So one time I also, with my staff, because I didn't have managers, I taught everyone courageous conversations. Courageous conversations is where we openly said that word to each other and said, hey, I need a courageous conversation with you. And we talked about the facts of how people either made us feel or if something happened. We just wouldn't take it personally. Instead, we would listen to that person fully, then get some feedback, and then try to rectify it. So the GM asked me for a courageous conversation. And we did these walking around the block. So these were walking meetings too. So just like in an office setting, you don't have to do this in a boardroom. We did it in a restaurant in this tiny bakery business. And we would just walk around the block. So during that time, she's like, why every time you come in, you go behind the counter and you redo everything? And I said, oh, I do? Like, I didn't even know I did it. She's like, it's really undermining for the staff that's there. And by this time, like, she had gotten me to the point where I wasn't there at open. So I was trusting that the opener would open the restaurant, but I would be there by like 8 or 9 before it got really busy so that I could make sure everything looked good. And she's like, it's really undermining to the staff when you do that. And I had no idea. And she actually said something that kind of hurt me and said, it doesn't look any different. And I was like, what are you talking about? It looks totally different when I do it versus, when there's 5 cookies on a plate versus 1 cookie on a plate. Come on, that looks different. So What my confession is that I was micromanaging, something that I said I never do, but I did just inherently do that, not even thinking about it. And what I've learned, or what I had to learn in that moment, was that my expectation, the end result that I wanted, needed to be clear. And then I had to let go of the process of how they got there.
Yes.
That was my biggest lesson.
Oh, wow. Yes. And such a common one, right? We're so passionate about our babies, and it is so hard to let go. But yes, letting go of the process, but you don't have to let go of the outcome. You can let go of how it happens, but you don't have to let go of that it's going to happen or needs to happen or needs to have a certain result at the end. Yeah, learning to relax about the specifics of how it gets there. Such an important skill.
And so hard. So hard to do.
Yeah.
I even remember back in my agency days, I'd be like, oh, well, just do this. I'm a pretty process person. I'm like, I'm writing it out for you. And then somebody gets lost, like a new person gets lost in the process. I'm like, how do you get lost in the process? It's right there. But yeah, they need to find their own ways through it.
Yep.
So,
yes. Yeah. Oh, well, okay. My follow-up question to that great insight for all of us that have micromanagement tendencies, how has that shaped the way that you now lead today? What do you take from that learning and apply to your life, to your business now?
I take so many lessons from my past, and even from that one example. That one in particular, I bring to my business owners when I work with them. We're putting together processes, or when I'm working with a manufacturer who wants things to be done faster, has time frames and things like that. So I look at taking those lessons and turning them on to them. And one of the biggest lessons too that I learned was in production, there are people who are going to go within a time frame. So let's, instead of saying we need this done in 15 minutes, maybe it's we need this done the fastest time, which would be me or somebody that, we're under the gun. We feel it. Our employees don't feel the time crunch like we do. They just won't. As an owner, you're just bought in a lot more than anyone else will be. So your time will always be the fastest, but how can you give a grace period of eight-ish minutes, 6 to 8 minutes? It depends on the task, but I give a range now. So instead, when we're optimizing what's happening on the floor in a production facility or out on a job site, we're doing a range of time versus this strict has to be done at this time and precise, so that they can also kind of let that piece of worrying go. If there's a problem, someone is continuously moving past the highest time frame, then we can address that one person. But instead of having this just general case of, everything's so slow and people even walk slow, they talk slow, and look at them taking a break and drinking their coffee. And,
so rude.
I mean, so rude. It's important. It's really important.
Yeah.
The other lesson is that we're, as business owners, we are so bought in. And again, sometimes not to the healthiest extent.
Right.
So we go overboard, right? Because we're just like, and then we might burn out, or however you deal with your down cycles. You don't want that for your employees. You want them to be steady, especially people that are, making stuff. We want them to be those folks that are not like us.
Right.
So we can't necessarily identify with folks that can sit on a floor and make the same thing over and over again.
Right.
But we need them. And we also need to take care of them and allow them to have their gossip time or their whatever they're doing.
Right.
When they start talking to each other.
Right. I was talking to some people the other day about working on a packing floor because it's cherry season here in Yakima. And there was a rule that when they were on the line, they couldn't even talk to each other.
Really?
And I was just flabbergasted that was the solution. No, they didn't last. They had extremely high turnover. So we set up what seems normal to us or seems reasonable, which is completely unreasonable and not sustainable for people.
No.
What a good reminder. If people need you, Amanda, as we're wrapping up, if they're like, oh my gosh, I need some chaos managed. I need some help. I need some sorting. How do they find you? Where do they go? And we will drop everything in the notes, all the links, but generally, where can they find you at?
Yeah, so my favorite social media channel is my Instagram. So it's at Amanda Bedell, or you can look at the links in this podcast show notes. I'm sure you'll have some links there, or my email address. I love hearing from folks. Any kind of question that you have, I'm there to answer. It's Amanda@bccbusinessconsulting.com.
Excellent. Well, thank you so much, listeners. Please, this woman is full of all the lessons I think we needed to learn at the beginning and learning to grow a business. So I encourage you, reach out. Amanda, thank you for your time today. Thank you for this great, honest conversation. It was so enlightening and fun and raw and just vulnerable. Thank you for all of those things. And until next time, listeners, go manage like a leader.
Thanks for being part of this community of revolutionary leaders who believe honest communication, healthy conflict, and building cultures of acceptance, respect, and trust are not only possible, but non-negotiable for cultivating world-class teams. If one-to-one coaching, engaging workshops, or strategic planning that is actually useful are anything that interests you, make sure to head over to transcendleadershipcollective.com to check out our free resources. Confessions of a Terrible Leader is hosted by Lacey Nelson and produced by Mary Scott. Music is by Leif Olson and Mary Scott from the band The Number of Months. Thank you so much for listening. Don't forget to like and subscribe and leave us a review. And until next time, go manage like a leader.